Welcome to today's webinar, compiled and produced by the team at biznews.com. All of our webinars are interactive. We encourage you to pose questions to our guests. The more challenging, the better. And the earlier you get the questions in, the better the chance of having them answered. The recording of this webinar will be available later today on the biznews.com channel on YouTube. Yeah, indeed, there it is. I'm Alec Hogg, as always, on a Monday for the Rational Radio webinar, although we've got a slight adjustment, as you can see on the screen there. This is not a CEO-only focused webinar, although we do have a CEO of a JSE-listed company, Peter Armitage, who will be in focus for the first 15 or so minutes. We are also today going to be having a look at the two big stories that are going around that do affect investments in South Africa. The first one is COVID-19. We heard the president last week opening up new areas. One of his strongest critics has been the organization that called itself Panda, and we'll have Nick Hudson from Panda who will be on the program a little later. And then the almost seismic move that we saw in the fight against corruption with the arrest warrant issued for the ANC's most senior official, Ace Magashule, gives us an opportunity to bring Paul O'Sullivan, Ace forensic investigator, into the conversation, and Paul will then be bringing us up to date on how the fight against corruption has been going, how he sees it. He's had a few breakthroughs of his own recently. So lots to talk about and lots that you can ask questions about. But my colleague, our general manager here at Biznews, Stuart Lohman, as always, is riding shotgun and has all the information about how the tech works. Stu, do you want to make sure that everyone can actually hear us?
Excellent, thanks, Alec, and welcome, Peter. Just quickly, those new to the webinars, there's a little control panel on the right-hand side. If you can hear my voice, see Alec and Peter in a presentation on screen, can you just give us a high five? There's a little high five option on that control panel. There we go, Alec. Yes, I've got some coming through. That's lovely to see. If the sound is a bit low, please let Alec know. You can adjust it upwards if need be. Alec also mentioned the questions. There's little questions drop down on that same control panel. Please put them in there and Alec can pass them on to the relevant guest. Alec, that's all good from our side though, thanks.
Brilliant. Well, I have actually just boosted the sound a little to make sure that everybody can hear exactly what it's about. Peter Armitage is the Chief Executive and founder of the Anchor Group. Pete, we go back, whoa, long time. I was saying off air. The late David Cart, a colleague of both of ours, I remember him telling me when you were still very, well, we were both very young, I guess. This is our superstar. You got to watch him. You worked with David in investor relations for a period of time, and then your entrepreneurial spirit took over. And Anchor has been a huge success story. It wasn't the first entrepreneurial endeavor that you've had, but when one has a look back at 2011 to where it is today, before we talk about the decision to delist from the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, when you founded it back then, did you have this in mind, that it would grow to the degree that it has into the business that it is today?
Alec, yeah, I mean, I didn't really start off with a giant vision in mind. I realized that there was a space in the market for bespoke wealth management for high net worth individuals. And we created a platform and a brand and a way of doing business which attracted both staff and clients. Importantly, our business is effectively a room full of people with a brand wrapped around it. So it's all about the people. And a lot of people in big investment banks and big competitors, chose to come and use our platform to service their clients. So, I think realistically, when we started, by this stage, I would have wanted to have 5 or 10 billion rand under management. I think that would have been reasonable. But we listed, we raised some capital. We also did some acquisitions. And today we're sitting with Anchor Capital, the business that we started with about 45 billion rand of assets. And then we've acquired other businesses, which have added about another 25. So we're sitting with, obviously changes day to day with the market, but around 70 billion rand worth of assets.
That's astonishing. So 6 times bigger than what you would have been happy with at the outset.
Yeah, I guess so. Also, it might have been a little less stressful, to have 20 staff rather than 250. Gone on a listed journey, lots of ups, lots of downs, but I'm very happy with where we landed up.
Peter, was it a natural progression for you from being a top-rated analyst and working for, well, I suppose the biggest names in South African investment, in the investment world, to branch off on your own in 2011?
Yeah, Alec, as you know my history. I left the industry when I was 30 to go and try an internet business. I've always had an entrepreneurial bent. And I think, sitting at big banks, you realize there's an opportunity to do something slightly differently. So it was, I guess at Investec one day, I just decided I wanted to do it myself. It wasn't a difficult decision to make. And I think I didn't want to end my corporate career not having tried and succeeded with my own business.
It was funny, I was talking to my wife about exactly that, about many people who don't follow their dreams, and it's that old hackney phrase of, I could have been a contender. It's the washed up old boxer, but it's wonderful to have given it a go, and you wonder how many people are getting to the later stages of their lives or careers and kick themselves for not ever trying the entrepreneurial route. Well, maybe you can just give us a little insight into what you would say to somebody who is in the same position that you're in nearly 10 years ago, thinking about starting their own business.
I think my kind of core thought is you've got to be on the soccer field to score a goal, so give it a go. I think the most important thing is the people that you, sorry, the most important thing is the people that you associate with, the people that you employ, the people that you partner with. That's everything in a business, and making sure that every single person fits in. And the importance of culture, even much more important than talent and ability to sell, is everything. And then secondly, the whole equity equation. I think to remember that equity is forever, and it's very easy in your early days to say, well, you have 5%, you have 10%, and you kind of dish it out. To hold on to that jealously, but at the same time to be generous and overly generous with the right people who are going to create value for you. Because you land up after 5 or 10 years with an equity mix, which wouldn't be what it was if you'd started from scratch, knowing what people added. So to put some very careful thoughts into that, and to try and do it in a way where you take the financial stress out of doing it. We partnered very early. I got Ivan Clark from Grindrod as a kind of core investor, and I knew that I had access to as much capital as I needed. Because it's when people start up businesses, you must be able to put all your effort and time into growing the business and doing the right things for the business, as opposed to scratching around for working capital.
Is Ivan still involved?
No, not on a day-to-day basis. He gave up. He was chairman of the business when we listed. The agreement was he would be chairman for a year after we listed. He then stood down. But he's still a client of ours. I still have a nice lunch with him once a quarter. Interestingly, he bought into the business in the early days. He sold about half of his shares 2 or 3 years after listing, and a year or two ago he bought them all back. So he's still sitting as one of our top 10 shareholders.
Well, Peter, I can see why he bought them all back. When you have a look at this share price graph of Anchor going above 20 bucks a share, it's now around 4 rand a share. It tells the whole story, doesn't it? You've been on the stock market now for 6 years, and in the last, half of your life as a listed company, there's been little appreciation, even though you have been growing. As an outsider, as an analyst looking at this, what would you make of what the share price graph is telling us?
Yeah, so I think we did the calc the other day. So we listed at 2 rand a share. And for people who bought in at that listing date, if you take into account the dividends they've received over the period, there's been about a 24% compound return. So that rolls easily off the lips. Must remember we've paid out, must be close to R2 of dividends since we started. So, for guys who invested and stuck with it from the early days, they've had an exceptional investment. But that certainly is almost offensive to people who bought in, kind of in the tens and above. I think, we listed a business which had a few million rand of bottom line earnings. The market went crazy. The share went up 10 times from listing in a year or so, which is obviously completely detached from the reality of a business. And we grew fast. We did follow that on with very nice earnings growth from kind of, the 3 or 4 million rand PAT to around 100 million rand of profit after tax if you go back to 2016. And since then, it's been very hard going. So we've grown our asset base, but at the same time, the stock market's gone sideways. So the platform that we've operated on has been difficult. We were making a lot of money out of performance fees and brokerage in the early days. That's not the case at all anymore. So, we've got a business which is making an annualized 80, 90 million rand profit after tax, but the quality of those earnings are exceptionally better than they were in the early days. And we also made one bad strategic acquisition. We've done 4 or 5 acquisitions. 4 of the 5 have been great. But we bought into an emerging market hedge fund manager. And, that contributed nicely to earnings going back into kind of 2015. But that fund had and business had a very unfortunate performance experience. We decided to slow that, to close that down. So that's the one kind of, with the benefit of hindsight, the one strategic mistake that we made. But yeah, so it got vastly overvalued. We obviously now think, the fact that we're delisting, we're very confident in the business and the cash flows that we can take on going forward. And hence, the idea to offer shareholders, we're borrowing money to buy shares back. This isn't about a private equity firm coming in and making an offer. This is about management initiating a deal with the bank to give us capital to buy shares back. But also importantly, we're giving people the opportunity to stay in. So we're not trying to take anybody's shares away who don't think it's a good enough price. And in fact, for people who stay in, I think there's an even better value creation potential than if we'd stayed as a listed business, because the maths of borrowing money and buying. Sorry.
No, why would that be? Sorry, and you're already preempting the answer to my question.
Yeah, so I mean, we're borrowing 250 million rand from RMB, which will mean there's 30% less shares in issue, roughly, obviously depending on the take-up and if it goes through. And we'll pay that debt down over a fairly short time period. So, there's some very nice accretion on an earnings per share basis for shareholders who continue to participate in the journey.
Peter, when people delist, it's always a very difficult decision because you have family and friends who've been with you for a long time as well as. So this structure that you're putting together where you will enable them to remain as shareholders in the business, are they going to be able to trade the stock during that period?
Yeah, so it obviously does change the nature. When you're listed, you can always put your shares on the market. I think realistically going into an unlisted business, the tradability changes dramatically. I think a reasonable expectation is, we've got to spend the first 2 years of this journey paying down the debt that we're taking on. But the intention is thereafter to create a facility where the company can continue to buy people's shares back. So if they are a medium-term holder of the business and we're going to keep it anyway, it doesn't really affect them. If it's somebody who is intending to sell their shares in the next 6 months, then it probably makes sense to take advantage of the liquidity now, and liquidity at a reasonable premium to what the share's been trading at over the last month or two.
And then from your own perspective, are you leading the borrowing of the 250 million?
So, yeah, I mean, the management and board of the company initiated it and organized it. So, yeah, I mean, there isn't really an outside party leading it. The company itself is providing security to go forward. And then Masimong, which is led by Mark Teke, is also putting more capital in with the objective of becoming 26% Black owned, which enables us to proceed with our plan to become a level 1 operator in South Africa, which is really a necessity nowadays.
Why so long to take this decision? In other words, the share price has been bobbling along at this level now for some years. Why now? What's the timing of the decision, or is there any relevance to the timing of the decision? Why not last year or 2 years earlier?
Yeah, actually, shout out staff. I mean, we've enjoyed being listed. It's a nice place to be. It comes with some pretty onerous regulations and ways of operating and costs, but that's certainly not the reason that we're doing it. I showed our staff on Friday an email that I sent to some of our directors late in April, post-COVID, and getting confirmation of the resilience of the business. I said, if those are the cash flow streams, the business can handle some debt to buy back. So I think there's different stages of a corporate's life. It makes sense to be listed. I think there's stages where it might make more sense to be delisted. So it's a combination of performance of the business. The share price it's rational for us to do the share price. I don't think I'd want to borrow money and pay too much more. And the third point is the price of money, Alec. Money is the cheapest it's been for many, many years. So we can borrow money at an after-tax rate in the mid-single digits, which makes it very viable. So the combination of those three things made it, we think, the logical thing to do.
How high would the share price have to go to for you to decide, okay, the market is now starting to appreciate us, maybe we won't delist after all?
I mean, it's difficult to put a number on it. It's more about, if the share price was 5 Rand or north of 5 Rand, I think we'd be taking too much risk if we then had to borrow 350 million Rand. The business can handle that amount of debt, and that's how we got back to it. But I think it's more about, the other factor that, you asked about the conditions. I think, the South African economy is likely to be in a tough place for quite some time. And I think the appetite to participate in the small cap segment of the market is going to be fairly limited for quite some time.
Well, given that you're right in the middle of these kind of discussions for your own company, and also your stock in trade is finding companies like yours that are undervalued. Is the JSE full of them? Full of similar type of situations of companies that I know Magda Wazikcha, for instance, when I interviewed her a while back, was saying, or not really, she couldn't really say much, but watch this space on a delisting there as well. Similar stories elsewhere that you found or that we should all be looking at?
Yeah, so I think there's quite a few opportunities. I think there's a lot of pretty good businesses that are trading at kind of unappreciated multiples. I think Signia is a case in point. I think she runs a great business, and I think that's that share offers quite some value. We've been looking at Grindrod recently, which is probably worth double its share price. You're now getting into the kind of small cap segment of the market. Something like Alviva, the old Pinnacle Holdings, based on its earnings in 2019, it's on a 2p multiple. So if they can get anywhere near back to that over the course of the next 2 or 3 years, you'll double or triple your money. But people aren't prepared to take that bet and wait. So people are selling out of shares at there's a lot of businesses where there's no ways that they'll trade at those kind of multiples in the private market if there was a transaction between the companies. So there's a list of probably another 10 or 15 quality businesses which have got that type of equation.
Peter, good luck with your endeavors. There's a lot of shareholders. You said just over 3,000 that you have to get support from. What is the process from here?
So the circular is out, and then there's a shareholder meeting on the 17th of December, and all the shareholders who are participating in the transaction, like Masimong, for example, can't vote. So conflicted parties can't vote. So this is a proposal which shareholders have to approve, and 75% of those present at the meeting have to approve. And then I think it goes into early February. People will get paid their cash or move into the unlisted company.
Well, we look forward to talking to you in a different guise in future. Thanks for dropping a few of those pearls on the table. I think there are lots of people listening today who are going to think, okay, Grindrod, better go and do some work on that. Also, Pinnacle, what's it called now? It's
Alviva.
Alviva, another one. And of course, with Anchor, with your shareholders having had a 24% compounded return, that's pretty good news. No one who bought pre-listing can be uncomfortable, but clearly those who got caught up in the hype in the first couple of years, just learn the lesson. Don't get sucked in, despite the opportunities that appear to be there. Good talking with you again, Peter, and thanks again for coming on to Rational Radio today.
Thanks, Alec.
Welcome to today's webinar. Well, you are welcome in today's webinar. We've got Nick Hudson, who is with us now. Nick, good to see you on the screen again. Looks like have you done the lockdown beard shaving off yet? I know in our various conversations.
Not yet, Alec. Looking forward to the day.
So that will be for you the day that lockdown is completely over, that we're back to normality in toto.
Completely over, and I think the next phase I'll give myself beardless for, which is to make sure that it can never happen again.
We've got the opportunity for people to ask you questions. It's very easy. There's a little question mark on the widget on the control panel. Just click on that, type in the question, and Nick is here to answer. Just by way of background, and I hope that most of the Biznews community have had the opportunity to listen to the Alec Hogg show interview with you, because it really was fascinating to get your insights. And it's always better when you have got, as we had half an hour or so, to really talk in depth about the way things have developed. We've seen the Great Barrington Declaration. Not everybody has actually read it or understands it properly. And we also, of course, know that Panda is an organization that you co-founded. Perhaps we can start with that. You're an actuary, you're in private equity. What is going on at Panda, and what is Panda?
So Panda is now an international organization, multidisciplinary think tank, focusing on coronavirus policy in general. And we're actually quite closely linked with the Great Barrington Declaration, because the 3 original signatories of that document are all members of our advisory board, scientific advisory board. The organization now has approximately 100 members, the majority scientists, quite an international slant to it, crossing all disciplines: immunology, vaccinology, epidemiology, and then more broadly, actuarial science, economists, lawyers, public health specialists, communications experts, statisticians. It's really a very diverse group, and some top minds in the field, geneticists and so on, who would be recognizable to anybody in the field as preeminent people in their fields.
That's quite a coup to get the guys who put together the Great Barrington Declaration on your advisory board. Were they just impressed by the work that Panda had done, or do you know them personally?
We got to know them prior to the signing of the Great Barrington Declaration online. So we had connected with the 3 of them. That's Professors Gupta Bhattacharya and Kulldorff, as well as the other 2 members, Professor Michael Levitt and Professor Sucharit Bhakti from the University of Mainz. So prior to the signature, we were already in contact, and we identified immediately that they were seeing the world the same way we were. And what was very interesting about those, this cast of characters, is they pretty much independently came to their viewpoints and then found each other in a similar fashion after listening to one another's YouTube videos and so on. All saying the same thing, all saying that this general lockdown approach has been a disaster, was predictably a disaster, that the right and the obviously correct thing to do in the face of a virus that has massively graduated age-based mortality was to focus on protecting the vulnerable and allowing the non-vulnerable to get on with their daily lives under conditions of more or less complete normality. And that was a conclusion we had arrived to at Panda in May. In our first paper, it was the concluding paragraph. But as it turns out, these scientists came to exactly the same conclusion quite independently. I would say, because they're experts in the field, they got to it faster than we did. They were there very quickly, because it is really conventional response to an epidemic. This general lockdown story is completely unconventional and at odds with the science. It's a messy affair that should never have been attempted.
Those are big names globally, including Professor Michael Levitt, who is a South African. He was born in this country and spent his early years here, and still, I think he still carries a South African passport. He still very much relates to it. But the other guys who are on are now on the Panda Advisory Board, these are not people who necessarily would have a warm spot or feeling towards South Africa. Why is it that they are taking such an interest in your organization?
Well, look, when we realized that the South African policy response had stopped being about the science and that we were getting no traction and the same errors were just being repeated time and time again, we realized it was just political and that it was being done with the air cover of the World Health Organization. And we realized that if we were going to have an impact and do the things that we thought were right to do, we would need to take our efforts international. And so we started looking around for similar organizations to Panda. And whilst we came across many groupings of, say, doctors or economists or whatever, there really wasn't anybody with the same diverse skill set, the ability to marshal all of the international data and to do the kind of studies that we were doing. So we abandoned the approach of trying to join somebody else and just decided to expand our story internationally. And I think they saw the same thing. They saw in our organization the ability to marshal skills from multiple disciplines, to cover all the international data, and to be a home for all these scientists who have, from the word go, rejected the policies that have been undertaken, but found no home even in their own institutions. And so it's been a great experience for us. They're wonderful people. I would encourage your listeners to have a listen to the interviews that we're rolling out of each of them. I had the rare privilege of spending nearly an hour interviewing Professor Sunetra Gupta, and I've got to tell you, it was one of the best hours of my life. I absolutely loved every minute of it. She's wonderful. Yeah, there will be more of those because it's important, I think, for people to understand the human dimension. With all the names being thrown around, granny killers, etc., etc., it's really important to meet people and to see that that's not what they're about. It's an awful slur to cast in the direction of a person who's in public health and who's making legitimate arguments that are consistent with all the prior science, to call them names like that, and actually quite disgraceful, if you ask me.
There are a few questions here. The first one is from Chaman, who says, you predicted 10,000 deaths originally, but you were 100% wrong. Can you explain why?
Well, we predicted 10,000 deaths at the time that the South African Coronavirus Modeling Consortium and the NICD were predicting 351,000 deaths. And whether it's 10 or 20 does not matter. The point is that this response was completely overwrought. So, we've had our model up on our website in public domain for many months now. I think our May model which is the first time we kind of departed from that initial rough estimate of 10,000 and started putting out an explicit curve in the public domain, is now tracking within 0.5% error. And what month are we in? 7 months later. So no, I mean, I'm not going to take that kind of criticism lying down. The predictions we've made, the errors that we pointed out in the government's models and the actuarial society's models have all been proven with the passing of time to have been spot on. They were overestimating the fatality rates. They were overestimating the susceptibility of the population to the disease. They were getting the timing of the peaks wrong. they were missing the seasonality story. We were correct in all of those things. Just as time has gone by, the detail has been filled in. So we know now why people are not all susceptible to this disease. It's because there is both T cell and B cell cross-reactivity, prior immunity from prior coronavirus infections. So the actual detailed mechanisms of the observations we were making are now being filled in. And you can go and look at our website. That original forecast is up there, and you can tell me whether you think that that was a bad job.
Cecil says, you have not been in favor of lockdown in South Africa. However, what is your attitude to lockdowns happening in Europe?
It's an absolute mess there. Alec, what's happening is that they've got the disease has gone into its seasonal endemic phase, along with all the other respiratory viruses that we've lived with for the entire duration of human history and then some. We could probably say mammalian history. And what's happened is you're getting the winter surge of respiratory viruses, but there are no excess deaths from coronavirus. In the UK, there are a few excess deaths, but they're deaths at home, and they're caused by basically lockdown conditions, by people being excluded from routine medical care and that kind of thing. So there's no second wave. It's just now an endemic seasonal virus, and that they're locking down in response to this is one of the most ridiculous public health policies that's ever been seen in the world.
What about what's going on in the United States right now? There is I suppose, a fair amount of fear-mongering, if you want to put it that way. A million infections in the past month, and it's spreading to areas that it wasn't at in the past. How are you reading this, particularly now that there's a new president coming into the United States who's made COVID-19 his #1 priority?
Well, the seasonal flux of the disease in the extreme latitudes in the United States will see to it that the disease basically begins declining as he comes into power. So timing will be good for him. He can claim success whatever he does. I hope that he doesn't do any of the stupid things that European leaders are doing. Unfortunately, he's showing every sign of doing it. He's going on about mask mandates and about lockdowns and about nationwide lockdowns. That would be deeply, deeply foolish.
Bruce says, Professor Alan Whiteside stated in a Biznews interview that the Great Barrington signatories are a group of, quote, well-intentioned idiots. He'd love a comment from you. Yeah,
there's nothing idiotic about Levitt, Gupta, sorry, not a signatory of the primary document, about Gupta, Bhattacharya, and Kulldorff. They are leading epidemiologists, and their perspectives are being demonstrated to be correct. Yeah, this is the very frustrating thing. There is absolutely no basis in epidemiology for general lockdowns in response to a graduated disease, just none. So whoever Professor Whitehouse is, he needs to learn some manners. You can come and debate me if you'd like.
We might just set that up for you, Nick. Why not? But Gerardus says there are some rumbles that there's been underreporting of COVID cases in South Africa.
Of COVID cases, definitely. I mean, but there are a couple of things in that, Alec. The first thing is that cases are always a big underestimate of actual infections. And you know, we know from whenever a serology test is done, a seroprevalence study, that the number of people who actually had an antibody response massively exceeds the number of official cases in any country in the world. But in cases, the official cases stories are also to some extent an overestimate of clinical cases, because there are lots of asymptomatic people who are recorded. You have to distinguish between a person who has the disease and a person who has the infection. And cases conventionally would be restricted to people who have the disease. But for some reason or other, we have departed from normal epidemiological standards, and we are including in our official cases numbers both those people who get sick and those people who don't. And it's all under the guise of this very shaky story of asymptomatic transmission in some kind of exceptional fashion with COVID. which we don't see as really being the case. That's a bit of malarkey that set this whole thing into a very dangerous spin in the first place. So I hope that answers the question.
I'm sure it does. The second last question for you, Nick, from Gerard. He says, there is such a radical divide between the panda and prevailing, e.g. CNN view. Can you speculate on the long-term implications of this?
Yes, I think many organizations are going to find themselves on the back foot. This policy has been a disaster. The mortality that flows from lockdown will exceed the mortality that flowed from the coronavirus on a global basis by some huge multiple, maybe 100. This is going to turn out to have been almost a genocidal policy response. In fact, scratch the word almost, it's genocidal. And that will flow through in the fullness of time. When an alien visiting this planet right now, looking at excess mortality for the world, would conclude that there was nothing going on. But when he looks in 2 years' time, you will see that there's a lot going on. We have savaged economies, destroyed people's livelihoods, cast people into poverty, and all of that has mortality consequences. We've missed cancer screenings. Any number of causes of death will rise by more than the total cause of death, the total numbers of death from coronavirus. It's been a global catastrophe.
But the implications of this, the long-term implications, what are you seeing coming or flowing from this when you talk about a total catastrophe? Someone surely has to be responsible or take accountability.
Yes, I think it's going to come one way or another, and it should come. It's not right that this kind of travesty should be unleashed on such a scale. It's not right that the views of scientists that were consistent with the pre-coronavirus science have been suppressed in such a severe way and ignored by organizations such as the World Health Organization. Any number of governments are on the back foot here now, and there will be change and there will be consequences, and we will make sure that we are part of driving that.
Final question comes from Chairman, just to follow up. He says, what does Nick think of the Trump response to the virus?
Well, the Trump response in many ways was a non-response. I like to say that Trump is, with respect to the coronavirus, he was like a stopped clock, right twice a day by complete accident. But a non-response was much better than a general lockdown. What he did, in essence, was leave it up to the states to determine their own response, which is what happened in the European Union. Each member state of the European Union had its own response. So, I mean, it's not, some kind of crime to do that. Were there things in the federal response that could have been done better and should have been done better? No doubt, but that's probably also true for all countries of the world. So I wouldn't regard Trump's response as having been particularly harmful. US mortality is no worse than European mortality. And I think the Democrats used this narrative very well to score political points. And I think, if you look at don't listen to Trump, listen to Scott Atlas. There's a man with common sense. And don't listen to Fauci. Fauci's been a complete lunatic in this whole thing. Even contradicting his own papers that he wrote in March, So it's just, entirely political. Science has been abandoned. There's no rhyme or reason in what most nations have done.
Nick Hudson, thank you for coming on to Rational Radio and for once again sharing your views and your thoughts with the Biznews community. Outspoken, focused, as per always. It's always really, really good to get your insights. Thanks, Nick. Look forward to the next time.
Alec. Yep. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Well, the someone that you can also know is guaranteed to give you the story as it comes straight without any embellishments is Paul O'Sullivan. Hi, Paul. I hope I got you on the line now.
Yep, loud and clear. Alec, how are you doing?
Very well indeed, and excellent to be talking with you again. Just from a broad perspective, we saw this extraordinary decision by the National Prosecuting Authority to arrest or issue a warrant of arrest for the most senior person in the ruling political party, Ace Magashule. I'm not sure if you saw the videos that have been circulating on WhatsApp and social media generally, but he doesn't seem terribly concerned. In fact, he had a few of his pals in the courthouse even singing and shouting "Viva" for him. Do we need to be concerned that this has been the reaction?
Well, I don't think so. You know, I think we're going to get all this sort of carry on. What's needed now is a state of law and order. We need to have the rule of law being applied in South Africa. He's out on bail, so if he starts stirring the pot and arranging for people to go toy-toying at his court cases and stuff, they should withdraw his bail and keep him in prison behind bars where he can't being involved in any further unrest, because it's clear that what he's doing will lead to unrest. And there's plenty of cases, previous historical cases, where there's a legal justification for withdrawing bail. And I would have no hesitation at his next appearance and telling him, listen, you come with any more of these people to court, we're going to withdraw your bail, and don't tell us that you didn't arrange it, because that's not acceptable. So you tell your supporters that if they want to see you sitting in jail waiting for trial, then they must come toy-toying outside the court.
Well, you've always taken a more optimistic view than most in our country about the transition to a more normal society. I recall you suggesting that there were going to be some arrests, and now we have seen them. But are we at that point of inflection? Are we at a watershed now in the fight against corruption?
No. We've still got a lot more to do, and we're busy doing it. You know, every area has its role to play. I mean, I'll give you a classic example. We opened a case at Brooklyn Police Station. Forensics for Justice did in September 2015. That's over 5 years ago now, against Lucky Montana. Now, for those that have forgotten, Lucky Montana and his corrupt buddies swiped the best part of 4 billion rand from Prasa. And, you know, not a single collar has been felt. And it's an unacceptable state of affairs. And I've recently seen that Lucky Montana is going to attend the Zondo Commission to give his version of events. And his version of events is that I'm actually a criminal. He's only facing these problems because of Paul O'Sullivan and because of a corrupt board at Prasa, and he's talking about Popo Malefi. Now, you know, if you cast your mind back, copies of our docket to the media, and I think they gave him a good hiding too. You also had a very good journalist at News 24, and he published what his findings were. And then, of course, you had, following that, you had, after we opened our criminal docket, I put the board of Prasa on terms not to pay any more money to Siangena Technologies. They were about to pay them 300 million rand. I appointed lawyers and we launched an urgent application. The money wasn't paid, so we saved Prasa 300 million rand there. And Prasa then had all the contracts set aside. And after they had the contract set aside, Prasa, Popo Malefi in particular, he wrote to Nklemeza, the unlawfully appointed corrupt head of the DPCI, and he put him on terms to take steps to not only bring Lucky Montana and his accomplices to book, but also to start freezing some of the monies that had been stolen. Now, coincidentally, I wrote to Shamila Batohi over the weekend because this fellow Norks Malela was suspended last week. And I said, you know, 2.5 years ago, I wrote to Sean Abrahams and said to Sean Abrahams, why are the Asset Forfeiture Unit not attaching the proceeds of crime that they know is out there? Mm-hmm. Now, to this date, not a single rand of all the money that's been swiped from Prasa and Transnet sorry, let's stick to Prasa because some of the money from Transnet has been attached. But the money that Lucky Montana swiped together with his accomplices, not a single rand of it has been attached. And we're talking a serious amount of money. So, and then you have this ridiculous situation where the erstwhile chairman of South African Airways, Dudu Mayeni Zuma, comes and sits at the Zondo Commission, and I lost count. I counted more than 100 times her saying, I won't answer that question in case I incriminate myself. Now, and then on day 2, I think, of her giving evidence, she commits a criminal offense. She names, I think, 3 or 4 or 5 times, she names Mr. X. There were police officers sitting inside the Zondo Commission while this is going on. They watch her commit an offense. They should have put the handcuffs on her right there and then. So my approach is that we're being far too soft for these criminals. We're giving them far too much leeway. If they want to sit there and thumb their noses at the country by lying to the Zondo Commission under oath, which is what Mayeni's partner in crime, Yake Kinani, did. Now, if they want to sit there and talk about their knowledge of economics, how you can buy something for 3 million and sell it for 9 million and not make a 6 million rand profit. If they want to do all that, they're thumbing their noses at the people, and they should just be arrested. They should be criminally charged immediately. And I think we need to start taking a harsher line with these people. They took a harsh line with us, by the way. I was dragged off planes. My offices were raided multiple times. I had criminals trying to kill me at the behest of generals in line. They arrested, what's his name, General Boyson. They arrested Clintus Breitenbach. They arrested Robert McBride. They tried to arrest Pravin Gordon. You know, if they want to conduct themselves in that manner, we must actually be at least as harsh on them. And I think what I'd like to see before Christmas is some of these people having the right act read to them. And if Mr. Ace Magashule wants to appear in court again with 20,000 bust-in supporters in the street, the magistrate needs to tell him, listen, yeah, if you bring supporters again, you're going to sit in breach of your bail conditions, and lock him up. And I think that's what I want to start seeing now. Enough is enough. No more Mr. Nice Guy. The country and the organizations, the state, now need to show that we can take a tough stance.
Just to remind you that Paul O'Sullivan is here also to answer your questions. And if you have a look at the little control panel, there's a question mark there. Click on that and put your questions forward, and I will pose them to Paul. Paul, just from a global perspective, we've seen what has happened in Brazil, and their Operation Car Wash took about 3 years before they had their first conviction. And now it's there are dozens of politicians, including the former president, who are sitting in very long-term cells. One of the richest people in the country, the owner of their largest, South America's largest construction company, is also, I think he's in there for 19 years. Are you seeing the escalation in South Africa of the system now that we've had a few arrests beginning?
So what my concern, Alec, we have a very good criminal justice system in South Africa that was captured years ago, probably in the region of 10 years ago, around the time of Celebi being sentenced. We had criminals and people with low ethics moving into senior positions in the National Prosecuting Authority. Ditto the police service machinery, which is still not uncaptured. And the problem you have is that it's impossible for example, Shamila Batohi and Godfrey Lebeya, the respective heads of the NPA and the DPCI, it's impossible for them to manage all these cases themselves. So they've got to have quality people below them. Now, in the case of Shamila, she's got this investigative unit which is starting to show its teeth, and we're starting to get comfortable about some of the things that are happening there. But, you know, I don't think there's several hundred people in that unit. And the number of people that need to be prosecuted over here runs into the hundreds. We're not talking about 100 people. We're probably talking about 500 or 600 people that need to be prosecuted. We've got dirty cops, dirty prosecutors. Some of these prosecutors are still sitting in their jobs and they're thumbing their noses. I've had to respond in the last 6 weeks to applications to cross-examine brought by the likes of Tory Pretorius, which if we listen to Abraham's, he's the buffoon that made a decision to prosecute Pravin Gordhan. And then we've got Michael Mashucha, another advocate in the NPA, who took a decision to prosecute me and others, including Sarah Jane Trent, and issue false warrants of arrest without getting our version of events deliberately, so that they could tie us up in legal knots and protect a corrupt chief of police. Now, these people have been bringing applications at the Sondo Commission for no other purpose than to have another swipe at us and accuse us of being the criminals and pleading that they're good people and they've done the right thing. So the time I've had to spend, and Sarah Jane, on preparing responses to these criminals is mind-blowing. I think we've probably both in the last month done 100 hours of work for the Sondo Commission. Now, what we need in South Africa, we can't just replicate what's happened in Brazil. They've got their own dynamics. We've got our own dynamics. We need to get to a position now where if you're going to drag the trial out, you can sit in jail instead of running around on the streets stirring the pot. You know, Jacob Zuma was charged more than 10 years ago. He still hasn't had his day in court. So while we've got criminals running this Stalingrad strategy, you know, I'm a Catholic, and we often hear the expression, you know, you're more Catholic than the Pope. Now, I think we've just been a little bit too soft with our latitude that we grant to people accused of criminal offences. No such latitudes were granted to me. I was dragged off a plane, I was tortured and detained for 4 days, and then they took all my passports and they wouldn't let me leave the country. I had to bring an application in court every time I wanted to visit my family overseas. And yet with these people, the criminals that have been doing all this, we're letting them run rings around us. So I'm of the opinion that we now need to start taking a, what was it Francois Pienaar said? No more Mr. Nice Guy. We need to start being tough. And if that means putting these people in jail without bail, we should do it.
Peter wants to know, he says his opinion is that the judges are scared to exercise the law in fear of retribution on their lives. Your comment?
No, I don't agree that's the case. You know, I've seen some of these judges, and there's, you know, some of them are very thick-skinned. I just look at the judge that sat, for example, on Radovan Krejcir. Now, Radovan Krejcir is probably far more dangerous than Ace Magashule or, you know, Jacob Zuma or any of them. This guy, I think, I've got a schedule of all the people he bumped off, and I think it's like 13 or 14 people in South Africa and half a dozen overseas. And that guy was a real nasty piece of work. He's sitting in jail now. We've not heard from him since. I doubt if we will hear much more from him now. He can't even make a phone call. He's kept in a prison in KZN where cell phone signals don't work inside the prison. So he's pretty much had his arms and legs cut off, and that's the last we hear of him. Now, that judge that sat on his trial had no hesitation whatsoever in dealing with him every time he stepped out of line. And I think, you know, the High Court judges and the Supreme Court of Appeal judges, they've been doing it for a long time. They know what they're up against. But if there are security assessments carried out and they decide that their life may be at risk, they can get protection. But I've yet to see a judge which would renege on his constitutional duty because he feels his or her life is in danger.
Well, Mokeng certainly has led the way in that regard, hasn't he, the Chief Justice? What about Shepherd Bushiri, that preacher Ponzi scheme guy who jumped bail? Do you think that that might start influencing a harder approach now from the criminal justice system that, as you've been saying, is a little soft?
Well, there's different horses for different courses. What you have to remember is that the Bashuras are not South African citizens. In fact, depending on which version of events is correct, they may not even have the right to be in the country legally in the first place. Now, on the other side of the coin, I don't know if anybody sat and watched that 28-minute video, but this gentleman lobbed some fairly harsh allegations at the investigating team that investigated him. Now, obviously I have no knowledge who these people are or whether the allegations are true or not. But it wouldn't be the first time in South Africa where cops have asked for money, and if you don't pay, you get arrested. In fact, it goes on a daily, if not weekly or daily basis in South Africa at the lower end of the organization. So I don't know. I think it's completely different. I mean, most of the people that stand accused of state capture or corruption in the state capture arena, most of them are only having a South African passport. The Guptas would be a notable exception. In fact, they illegally had South African passports. So I think probably for the most part, most of the people wouldn't have anywhere to run. They'd have to stay put in South Africa. So I think the idea about being detained without bail is to make sure, it's for two things or several things. First of all, it's to make sure that you do attend your trial. And that's the most important thing. And the second thing, which is equally important, is to make sure that you don't interfere with the investigation or interfere with witnesses. Now, I don't care what anybody says. For Ace Magashule to stand at a microphone and claim what? He's tacitly implying that if you're a witness against him, you're going to get it. So I think they just need to, you've been charged, you're coming to court, you come to court quietly. The law gives you a right to bring your legal counsel with you. They want you to sit without bail, they must also come. And then we'll cancel your bail and you can sit behind bars. They do that with one of these people. The rest of them will attend court quietly and stop grandstanding.
Paul, just to close off with, the way that things are progressing, are you comfortable, apart from the softness that you've articulated, that we are moving in the right direction in South Africa? And if that is the case, what's the road ahead looking like? How long do we still have before normality will return and before criminals will fear the criminal justice system?
Yeah, I think it might be a year or two still. I mean, when you get, I'm a businessman. I'm involved in different areas of business, and I also have and own a forensic practice. And I look at my staff who are qualified lawyers and certified fraud examiners, and I look at them when they go to the police station to open a criminal docket, where they have a lever arch file which sets out quite succinctly how somebody has stolen 100 million rand. And the cop on the other side of the counter at the police station, without understanding what he's looking at, states, no, that's a civil matter, you can't open a criminal case. And it's that mentality, that complete lack of service within the South African police service. I think what has to happen is the chief of police has to issue an instruction that any police official refusing to open a docket must be suspended without pay, because we don't have confidence in the criminal justice system. And the reason we don't have that, I dealt with a case, we were contacted last week by somebody who'd been badly assaulted and went into a police station, dripping blood on the floor, and he was chased out of the police station because he was making a mess on the floor.
Yeah.
Now, when you've got that lack of empathy and lack of ability by police officers to do their job, you're not going to have confidence in the criminal justice system. So the starting place has to be the visible face of the criminal justice system, which to the man in the street is your police station or your guys that are patrolling, doing their area patrols or responding to crimes in progress. Now, until that has improved drastically, which it won't do while you've got criminals in the police service, until it's improved, I'm afraid there's always going to be a lack of hope that things are starting to improve. What we do whenever somebody refuses to open a docket, we say, okay, call the station commander. We're going to wait here, call the station commander. When they say, no, he's not here, say, that's fine. Then give me his telephone number. People need to start being tougher in this approach. If the police open a docket and they later find that it's not been set out properly or there's no case to answer, they can close the docket. But to flatly refuse to open dockets when a person comes into a police station to report a crime is completely unacceptable and it's unconstitutional.
Paul O'Sullivan, as always, giving it straight from the heart and giving us some good insights there. A couple of years yet before things start normalizing, but we are moving in the right direction. And as long as we've got people like Paul who are doing their bit as at Forensics for Justice, well, then we can be looking forward with some hope, I guess. Just to remind you that if you like what Paul does, and many of us do, and unfortunately, he's also, Forensics for Justice also needs to be funded. If you feel like funding a worthy cause, just go online, look at forensicsforjustice.org, and that's a very easy way to support him. I hope you consider that as an option. It's been our privilege and pleasure once again to be of service to you today. I see Bruce sent an email where he said that a Biznews moderated discussion between Nick and Alan, Nick Hudson and Alan Whiteside, would be really useful to Biznews subscribers. Alan should provide justification for his disparaging dismissals of the Great Barrington Declaration and its eminent and respected authors. Well, we'll ask, and let's see, perhaps we'll get them on this time next week. Always on a Monday at noon, we have Rational Radio. Usually we focus on investment only. I just thought it was a good idea this week with some other big issues that are happening to bring in Nick Hudson and Paul O'Sullivan, and judging by the number of people who were on the webinar, and of course this is only premium subscribers and who stayed with us all the way through, I can see that you enjoyed it as well. Well, look forward to being back in your company again next week. I'll let you know if we can get the two of them on to debate that issue. Should be lots of fun. Until the next time, from me, Alec Hogg, and our team at Biznews, we wish you a very, very good week ahead. Thank you for joining us for this webinar, which is compiled and produced by the team at biznews.com. A recording of this webinar will be available later today on the biznews.com channel on YouTube. From our team, until the next time, cheerio.